Throughout the weekend thus far, there has been a virtual unanimous recognition that somehow institutionalized religion is not just deficient, but seriously weak and ineffective. I have spent my entire life as part of a local congregation and to a lesser extent in higher adjudicatory politics, if you will. Not as a minister or pastor, but as an ordained officer in the Presbyterian Church. I recognize the validity of everything that I've heard. Institutionalized religion is weak. It is defective. It is woefully incomplete, compared to the world that you all are describing. And yet, the question is, how do you all exist? How do you function? How do you think the world ought to function without the institutional life that many of us, thousands of us, millions of us around the world are committed to supporting, encouraging, and, in effect, paying the bills?
I want that one first. I'm an Episcopal priest. I'm in the church all the time. I'm in churches all the time, though I have a wonderful chance to be in many kinds of churches, even Pentecostal churches, even churches where I don't know where I'm supposed to sit or where or stand. I don't wish at all for that to go away. You made me remember a woman I met in New Zealand, a strong pillar of her congregation, who said something about how she felt for people who, once they learned to walk, despised the crib. Isn't that a wonderful thing to think about? And she turned me at that point, and I pledged to her in my mind I would never despise the crib. I would support it with my money. I would support it with my efforts. I would always include it, in my writing and my vision. Yet I would not limit any of that to my church alone, my crib, my native language, the giver of my stories and my songs, and my different communities. So I would never forsake that. When Mirabai spoke, though, I did think about we have different natures. I think we have different natures. And so much of the polarization that goes on today extends into anything someone says to be true about themselves can become interpreted as what should be true for all people. And it makes it really hard to be a public speaker, because you feel like you have to have a disclaimer at the beginning in many situations to say, I have the mic, and that is dangerous, because it can sound like I'm handing out a prescription instead of a description. But all I would say to you and to those who listen is I have no will. I've had people say to me, institutionalized religion is the only kind there is. That is how things are translated from generation to generation, is through the institutions of faith that remember over and over again the necessity of direct experience and intellectual life, along with institutional life, to keep a full-bodied faith, a living faith. So that's one answer. And you'll hear two others, I'll bet.
So I like the crib metaphor, because nobody ends up staying in the crib unless they're stillborn, unless they have, infant what is it called? Infant death syndrome, right? You grow, my 4-year-old isn't in the crib anymore. I don't despise the crib. Just don't want to be limited to the crib. I'm too big to be in the crib. If your institutional religion uses its myth and its metaphor and its music and its magic to point beyond itself, amen. If it uses its myth and its metaphor and its music and its magic to point to itself, get the F out. It's killing you. I love the motto of the Theosophical Society. There is no religion higher than truth. I want truth. I think the Presbyterian myth and music and magic and metaphor can point to truth. It's not the problem with that with the idea of the Presbyterian approach to Christianity. It's what does your church do? Who does it point to? Is it parochial or is it perennial? Is it parochial or is it universal? Can it use its parochial genius to lift people beyond it? Or is it all about circling the crib, and keeping everyone in their cribs? So I just hear that, but I don't want to despise the crib. You're an adult. You don't belong in a crib. And so, I'll just repeat myself if I say it again.
Thank you. And what I've identified over the last few years is a phenomenon that I would call a population of people, of beings, I would name the keepers of the jewels. So that I have seen that in each of the world's great spiritual traditions, there are the Father Thomases and the Thich Nhat Hanhs and those, I need to name some women, but it's a little harder to remember because the men seem to dominate. But there are those who are so deeply rooted in the essence of their own tradition that, like Cynthia Bourgeault says, they get to that, well, she doesn't say it this way, but it's like they reach that aquifer of those living waters that belong to all of us. So they naturally lead to an interspiritual heart. They have an interspiritual heart, but they are the keepers of the jewels, and thank God for them. I used to wish that I could be one of them, that I could find a home in a particular religion and just know that that's where I belonged, and that I could cultivate that intimacy with the treasures that lie at the heart of that tradition, whatever it is. I tried 6 or 8 of them. But eventually I realized that, that wasn't my temperament, but thank God for the ones who did, because in the changes that are to come, those jewels are going to be vitally, urgently needed. And they must not be squandered or thrown out with the necessary collapse of the structures that are not only no longer relevant, but often are toxic and dangerous. So some of those structures, I feel, have to go. Why are so many young people finding organized religion not only irrelevant, but dangerous? I mean, I think there is something to that. But that doesn't mean that they're not thirsty for a spiritual life, for a contemplative life, for a life of compassionate action that is rooted in the life of the soul. They are.
Any of you who, I just discovered a wonderful paper by 2 Harvard Divinity School students, one of whom is, he says, not a theist, not a believer, but it's called How We Gather. And it's pretty easy to find if you can put that into a search field. And it is about the ways in which the next generations are gathering, and that they're not familiar ways, but they recognize 6 values in that paper, and I'll fail if I go much beyond purpose, self-transformation, social transformation, community, da-da-da-da, and the 2 I forgot. But it's everything from, don't anybody groan, but everything from, CrossFit to this wonderful thing called the Millennial Train Project. Have you ever heard about this? Bunch of people who get on a train and travel for X hundred miles and talk and conference and go to seminars and teach while they're getting off at all the places they stop. It was just a real mind changer to not bemoan, how do we get the young people to do it the way we did it? But instead to start reading about how people are are gathering and the values they're gathering around and all the different shapes that's taking and who the ancestors are. Because in each case, they name about 10 case studies and they name, who the ancestors of these current gathering movements are. And it's quite a fascinating thing, how we gather, by 2 Harvard Divinity School students.
So I just want to add a couple of things, or at least one. I love the jewel metaphor. I worry when I see organized religion of any kind. I mean, imagine a diamond in a setting. They ignore the diamond and argue about the setting. And we need new settings for new generations, but the diamonds are timeless. So the jewel is timeless.
You're about to steal my new sermon?
Okay,
So
sorry.
could you stop? I stayed up most of last night. I am not staying up tonight again, okay?